There's a version of this that doesn't sound like a financial crisis at all. You're 58. The mortgage is almost done. You've got something in your 401k, not as much as the calculators say you should have, but it's there. And for the first time in a long time, you can actually see the end of the road. Not rich, not coasting, just finally starting to feel like the math might work out. Then one of three things happens. Your insurance premium jumps, a prescription changes. Or your kid calls not to catch up, but because things fell apart and they need somewhere to land for a while. None of it is a disaster, exactly, but each one costs you $1,200, $1,500 a month you weren't planning on. And the real problem isn't just the money, it's when it shows up. When that kind of leak shows up at 58, you're not just losing cash, you're losing years. A $1,500 hit to your monthly cash flow is $18,000 a year you weren't spending before. That's not a bad year. That's time you don't really get back. I've been in enough of these conversations to know the fear that actually keeps people up isn't "I'll be poor." It's something quieter than that. It's "I was almost there. And now I have to start over, and I don't have the same amount of time left to do it." That's the part no retirement headline really talks about. About 19.5% of people 65 and older were still in the workforce in 2024, which means this isn't a rare story. Some of them chose that. A lot of them didn't, not because they were reckless, not because they made one terrible decision, but because life kept showing up after 55 in ways the standard retirement advice wasn't really built for. I don't think every retirement story has a single villain, and this video isn't going to pretend it does. What I do want to walk through is a harder question. Why do some people do a lot of things right and still end up losing ground in the final stretch? That's the part worth understanding. Because if you're somewhere between 40 and 55 right now, what happened to a lot of boomers isn't just history. It's a preview of the same mechanisms still running. Before we talk about what went wrong, I want to get something straight. The generation before boomers had a retirement system that was easier to understand. You worked for a company long enough, you got a pension. Social Security filled in some gaps. You retired around 65. The math was mostly done for you. That model didn't disappear overnight. It just quietly stopped applying to more and more people, right as boomers were entering the workforce. Pensions started phasing out. 401ks came in, and on the surface that sounds like a trade, but it wasn't really an even swap. The old model said, your employer carries most of the risk. The new model said, you do, and it handed you that responsibility without handing you the training that goes with it. Suddenly you weren't just saving, you were expected to know how to invest, when to rebalance, how to survive a bad market year without panic selling, how to avoid the kind of timing mistakes that can quietly cut years off your compounding runway. I had a version of this belief for a while, that retirement failures were mostly about people not saving enough. The more I looked at actual cases, the more I kept seeing something else. People who did save, who did try, but who started the game right when the rulebook was being rewritten. Here's what that shift looks like in numbers. The IRS 401k contribution limit for 2026 is $24,500. The IRA limit is $7,500. The system today is built entirely on the assumption that individuals will self-fund the majority of their retirement. That's not hidden, it's the design. But the Fed found that in 2023, only 34% of non-retirees felt their retirement savings were on track. That number isn't surprising when you understand the structure. When the risk moves to you, every mistake gets more expensive. Every bad market year, every period of unemployment, every behavioral mistake hits your timeline directly. The system doesn't absorb those shocks anymore. You do. Think about it this way. If both you and your neighbor need to generate an extra $20,000 a year in retirement income, under the old pension model, the employer carried most of the timing and market risk for that. Under a 401k model, you need the capital, the right allocation, the right sequence of returns, and enough time left to recover if any of those things go sideways. Same $20,000, completely different pressure. That's not an excuse for anyone. Responsibility still falls on individuals. It has to. But it also means we can't tell a story where retirement failure is just about discipline. A lot of people were handed a system shift they didn't fully see coming, without enough time to adjust before it mattered. If you're looking back at your own situation and thinking, I should have done more, I want to offer a slightly different frame. Not to let anyone off the hook, but because the honest version of this conversation has to account for structure, not just behavior. The retirement system transferred risk to individuals faster than most people could adapt. That's the mechanism. That's what actually needs to be understood before we can talk about what to do about it. And even knowing all of that, there's still a question that doesn't go away. Why do some people who seem to be doing okay, who have made it to their late 50s without a major disaster, still end up losing ground at the end? That's the part that gets overlooked, and it's the part we need to talk about next. Most people picture retirement failure as a moment, a bad investment, a crash they didn't see coming, one decision that blew everything up. That's not usually how it happens. What I've seen more often is quieter than that. It's three categories of cost. They arrive gradually, don't look catastrophic on their own, and are very hard to reverse once they've been running for a few years. Not dramatic, just persistent. The first one is healthcare. After 55, the issue isn't just the big medical event everyone's bracing for. It's the baseline cost that's already running before anything goes wrong. Premiums, deductibles, prescriptions that get added or changed, dental and vision that Medicare won't cover the way people assume, the gap between when you stop working and when Medicare actually kicks in at 65. Medicare Part B alone runs $202.90 a month in 2026. That's the standard rate before supplemental coverage, before Part D, before out-of-pocket. For two people, you're already looking at nearly $4,900 a year just for that one line item. Fidelity estimates that a single person retiring at 65 today may need around $172,500 in after-tax savings specifically to cover healthcare costs through retirement. That is just healthcare, not housing, not food. The bill doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives as a premium that went up $80 this year, a new prescription added to the list, a procedure that hit the deductible harder than expected. Each one feels manageable. Together, over time, they quietly take up space that was supposed to go somewhere else. The second leak is housing, specifically the carry cost. A paid-off house is a real asset. Nobody's arguing that. But paid off doesn't mean free to live in. Property taxes, homeowners insurance, maintenance, HOA fees if they apply, HVAC systems that don't ask permission before failing, roofs that have their own timeline regardless of yours. I've been close to conversations where someone says we paid off the house with real relief in their voice, and when you actually look at the monthly picture, they're still carrying $900 to $1,200 a month in housing-related costs, not a mortgage. Just the cost of keeping the place running. At $1,000 a month, that's $12,000 a year. That's not far off from what a lot of people receive annually from Social Security. One person's benefit essentially redirected back into the house that was supposed to represent security. A lot of people end up asset-rich but cash flow tight. That's a real position to be in, and it's one that doesn't show up clearly until you're already in it. The third leak is family. This one's the hardest to talk about because it doesn't feel like a financial mistake when you're making it. It feels like doing the right thing. An adult child comes back after a divorce or a layoff. A parent needs more support than expected. A sibling hits a rough stretch. The choice to help isn't wrong, but just for a little while has a way of extending. Not because anyone is taking advantage, but because life doesn't resolve on schedule. I've seen people do this without realizing how long it had been running. Someone 57, not extravagant, not irresponsible, just quietly adding $800 a month to keep a family member stable while the situation sorted itself out. 18 months later, that's nearly $15,000 out of a window that was supposed to be the final savings push. $800 a month in family support, sustained for 2 years, is $19,200. Not a vacation, not a splurge, just the cost of not wanting to say no to someone you love when they needed help. What makes these three leaks dangerous isn't any one of them. It's that they can run simultaneously, and they're almost impossible to see clearly when you're inside them. There's a version of this where someone is still contributing to their 401k, still telling themselves they're saving, still checking the account balance and feeling okay, while underneath, healthcare, housing, and family obligations are pulling $2,500 to $3,500 a month in directions that will never compound into anything, saving at the surface, leaking at the foundation. The trade-off is invisible until it isn't. Keep running all three leaks from 55 to 62, and the number you finally see at retirement isn't just smaller than you hoped. It's smaller than what your contribution history should have produced, and at that point there's not much runway left to figure out why. That's the honest version of what retiring broke actually looks like for most people, not reckless, not uninformed, just quietly eroded by three things that felt like life because they were. Which is why the question I'd push back to first isn't, are you saving enough? The better question is this: which of these leaks is already running? And do you still have enough time to close it before it decides the outcome for you? The shift that helped me think about this differently is simple. Most retirement conversations are built around one question: do you have enough? Enough saved, enough contributed, enough in the account to hit the number. And that question matters, but it misses something that I think matters more, especially after 55. The question that doesn't get asked often enough is, how hard does a single setback hit you, and do you still have enough time and flexibility to recover from it? That's what I started thinking of as reset risk. It's not about whether you're rich or poor, disciplined or not. It's a measure of how much a late life event, a health cost, a housing repair, a family obligation can push your retirement timeline back at a point when you don't have the same runway to absorb it that you had at 40. A $1,000 a month leak doesn't mean the same thing at every age. At 45, that's painful, but you've got time and earning capacity. You can adjust. At 58, that same $1,000 a month, running for 5 years before retirement, is $60,000 in cash flow that doesn't compound into anything. That's just the raw number. Gone, same hit, completely different consequences. I used to think the balance in your retirement account was the main thing telling you how ready you were. I don't think that anymore. I've seen people who looked fine on paper, solid account balances, reasonable contribution history, but were actually extremely fragile because they had no margin, no buffer, no flexibility left to absorb the next thing without it directly affecting the plan. And the next thing always comes. So the framework I use now has 3 parts. Not a formula, more like 3 questions worth being honest about. First, what kind of reset are you actually facing or likely to face? Does it increase your spending, cut your income, hit your assets directly? Each of those plays out differently, and knowing which one you're dealing with changes what you do about it. Second, how much recovery time do you actually have left? There's a real difference between someone with 15 years of working runway and someone with 5. Same problem, very different options. Most people don't sit with this question long enough. They know their age, but they haven't really calculated what their remaining margin actually looks like. Third, what flexibility do you still have access to? What can you cut, delay, sell, or restructure without collapsing your quality of life? This is the one that separates people who get through a late setback from people who don't, not income, not even savings balance. It's optionality, the ability to make a move when you need to. The IRS data on catch-up contributions is actually a useful illustration of this. The 2026 limits give people 50 and older real tools. The 401k limit goes to $24,500, with additional catch-up room on top of that. Those tools exist for a reason, but they only work if you have enough margin in your cash flow to use them. A lot of people aren't short on accounts, they're short on margin, and no contribution limit fixes a margin problem. two people, both 58, both carrying $300,000 in retirement savings. On paper, identical, but one of them has three active lakes, no bridge money, and a fixed cost structure that doesn't bend. The other has identified where the fragility is and started closing it. Same balance, very different reset risk. That's the distinction the account balance doesn't show you. I'll be honest, I don't think this framework is perfect for every household. It's not a guarantee of anything, but it asks the right question first, not how much do you have, but how hard can you get hit before the whole plan shifts, because that's the question that actually tells you where to start. Retirement stops being just about accumulation and starts being about something harder to measure. How much room do you have to maneuver when life decides to get expensive again? That framing changes what you pay attention to, and it changes what you do first. Same age, same account balance, very different outcomes. That's not a hypothetical. It's what actually separates people who get through the final stretch of working years intact from people who don't. It's usually not income, and it's rarely luck. The difference is usually in the structure underneath the numbers. Take two people, both 56, both sitting on around $300,000 in retirement savings. Neither one is in crisis. Both feel like they're doing okay, more or less. The first one is mostly looking at the balance. It's not where they wanted it to be, but it's growing. They figure they'll sort out the healthcare question later when it's more concrete. The house is paid off, so that feels like security. If a kid needs help, they'll figure it out. The plan is to keep working, keep contributing, and see where things land. The second person has been looking at something different, not just the balance, the leaks. They've identified that their fixed monthly costs are running higher than they need to be, and they've started closing the gap. They've separated out what they'd need in an emergency from what's actually invested for the long term. They've had the uncomfortable conversation with their family about what they can and can't sustain financially going forward. They're not richer, they're just less fragile. 5 or 6 years from now, one unexpected expense hits both of them. Same dollar amount. For the first person, it forces a retirement account withdrawal at the wrong time or a delay in the timeline or both. For the second person, it's absorbed, not painlessly, but without permanently altering the plan. Same balance at 56, completely different exposure. Here's what that looks like in practical terms. A household that reduces its fixed fragility by $700 a month has effectively improved its financial position by $8,400 a year. That's not a trivial number. In many cases, that kind of structural improvement is a stronger move than chasing an extra percentage point of investment return, because it reduces the chance of being forced to make a bad decision under pressure. The Fed's data backs up why this matters. Retirees who rely primarily on Social Security or public income report significantly lower financial well-being than those with additional income sources, whether that's employment, pensions, or investments. That means relying on only one income source creates real vulnerability, and something will shift. The Social Security trustees currently project the OASI Trust Fund can pay full benefits through around 2033. After that, if nothing changes legislatively, ongoing revenue would cover roughly 77% of scheduled benefits. That's not a reason to panic. Congress has intervened before and likely will again, but it is a reason not to treat Social Security as the only layer of the plan. It was designed to be a floor, not a ceiling. The Fragility Path isn't reckless. It just has a particular blind spot. It optimizes for the number in the account while leaving the structure around it soft. When life stays predictable, it works fine. When it doesn't, and after 55, predictability is genuinely harder to count on. The whole thing can shift faster than expected. The resilience path doesn't promise a better number. It promises fewer forced decisions, less exposure to the kind of late stage reset that's very hard to recover from on a shortened timeline. The trade-off worth sitting with is this. Spending your 55 to 65 window patching leaks and building flexibility is slower, less satisfying, less visible than watching a balance climb. But it's also what keeps a single bad year from becoming a permanent recalculation. The word I keep coming back to is optionality, not wealth, not a bigger account. The ability to make a real choice when something unexpected arrives instead of just reacting to it. So the next question is practical. If you're somewhere between 45 and the early 60s and you can see pieces of this in your own situation, what do you actually do first? Not to fix everything, just to become harder to knock off course. None of what follows is about getting rich. It's about getting harder to knock off course. That's a different goal, and it leads to different decisions. Step 1. Find the biggest leak before you increase contributions. This goes against the advice people usually hear, which is almost always save more, contribute more, max the account. And that advice isn't wrong, it's just incomplete if there's a significant leak already running underneath. If healthcare costs, housing carry, or family obligations are pulling $800 to $1,500 a month out of your cash flow, adding 2% more to your 401k doesn't fix the math. It just makes you feel like you're doing something while the foundation keeps draining. I've seen this play out more than once. Someone genuinely trying, bumping their contribution rate, feeling good about it, while their homeowner's insurance quietly jumps year after year, or a family support arrangement quietly extends month after month. On paper, they're saving more. In practice, the net position barely moves. Cutting $500 a month from an active leak is $6,000 a year back in your control. Depending on where you are, that can be a stronger move than any small adjustment to your investment allocation. Find the floor first, then build on top of it. Step 2. Build bridge money not as a luxury but as a structural layer. Here's the friction moment that actually causes a lot of late-stage retirement damage. You don't want to touch your retirement accounts early. You know the taxes, the penalties, the long-term cost of pulling money out before it's time. You've been told 100 times not to do it, but then the car breaks down, or your kid needs a place to land, or your deductible hits at the worst possible time. And because there's nothing flexible sitting between you and the retirement account, you pull from it anyway, not because you plan to, because there was no other option. Bridge money isn't anti-investing. It just keeps you from selling under pressure. It's the layer that keeps a short-term problem from becoming a long-term scar. The target range worth thinking about is somewhere between 6 and 12 months of essential expenses, held somewhere accessible, not locked up, not subject to market timing. The exact number depends on how stable your income is and how exposed you are to healthcare or family volatility. But the point isn't the specific amount. The point is having something between you and the retirement account when life gets expensive outside of schedule. A short-term shock without bridge money has a way of turning into a long-term problem. That's the version of events worth avoiding. Step 3. Use catch-up contributions correctly, which means only after you have margin. The catch-up rules for 2026 are genuinely useful. If you're 50 or older, the 401k limit goes to $24,500 with additional catch-up room beyond that. If you're between 60 and 63, Secure 2.0 gives you an even higher ceiling, $11,250 in catch-up on top of the base limit. IRA catch-up brings another $7,500 for 50 plus, but they only work if your cash flow actually has room for them. If you're running active leaks and carrying no bridge money, maximizing contributions just means you're optimizing the top of the structure while the bottom stays soft. The account looks healthier. The overall position doesn't. You don't need to max everything to make meaningful progress. An extra $500 a month, $6,000 a year, held consistently through your late 50s and into your early 60s is real movement. The goal isn't the maximum. The goal is sustainable, uninterrupted progress during the years when your earning capacity is likely at its highest. Those years don't repeat. That's the trade-off worth keeping in mind. Step 4. Have the real conversation with your family about what you can and can't sustain. Most retirement plans don't fail because of a bad investment decision. They quietly get reshaped by financial obligations that were never clearly defined, support that started as temporary and never got a formal endpoint, help that expanded because no one set a boundary, commitments made out of love that turned into structural costs. A couple willing to help their adult child gets that right. What often goes missing is the specifics: how long, how much, and what the stopping point looks like. Without those parameters, temporary becomes indefinite. And indefinite at $700 a month is $8,400 a year. Over 2 years, that's nearly $17,000, not from recklessness, just from a conversation that never happened. I understand why these conversations don't happen. They touch on family identity, the feeling that setting limits means you don't care enough. I've been close to enough of these situations to know they're not easy. But delaying them is almost always more expensive than having them. Avoiding the conversation doesn't really protect the plan. It just postpones the moment when the cost becomes impossible to ignore. What all 4 of these steps have in common is what they don't promise. None of them will make you wealthy quickly. None of them are especially satisfying to do. They're not the kind of moves that feel dramatic in the moment. They just make you harder to reset. And after 55, that's the game that actually matters. If any of these leaks feel familiar, if you recognize something in the healthcare numbers, the housing carry costs, or the family piece, drop the word reset in the comments. I want to know which one is showing up as the most real for people watching this. Let's bring it back to where we started. A person at 58, house almost paid off, something in the 401k, finally starting to see the shape of the finish line. Not rich, not behind in any obvious way, just close enough to feel like the math might actually work out this time. That's the version that's most at risk, not because of one bad decision waiting to happen, but because 3 slow leaks, healthcare, housing carry, family obligations, can run quietly for years before the damage becomes visible. And by the time it is visible, the runway to fix it is a lot shorter than it used to be. Boomers didn't largely retire into difficulty because they were careless. Many of them entered the workforce right as the rules changed, pension security gave way to individual responsibility, and the system transferred risk to people who were never fully equipped to carry it. It's not an excuse, it's just how the system evolved, and understanding that shift is the only way to avoid repeating it. The thing that made late-stage retirement failure most likely wasn't ignorance. It was getting reset too late to recover easily. One event or 3 slow ones running at once, at a point in life when time, energy, and earning capacity are no longer what they were. So the question worth sitting with isn't just how much do I have. Ask yourself this instead. If a leak of $1,000 a month showed up tomorrow and ran for 5 years, how many of your options would that close off? How much of your flexibility would it consume? Would you still be able to make real choices, or would you just be reacting? That's what reset risk actually measures, not the balance, the room to maneuver. I don't know the specifics of every household watching this. I can't tell you exactly which leak is running in your situation or how much time you have left to close it, but I do think most people in this position need less judgment and more clarity. Less you should have started sooner, and more here's what's actually happening and what you can still do about it. That's what the next video is going to be about. Specifically, how to tell which leak is doing the most damage to your retirement outlook right now and which ones are just noise. Not every expense is a retirement risk, but some things are. And they're worth finding before they find you.